Imagine a wave, not of water, but of molasses, sweeping through the streets at a speed of 35 miles per hour. The date was January 15, 1919, an unusually warm winter day in Boston. In the heart of the city, a gigantic storage tank filled to the brim with molasses burst, unleashing a sticky, sweet, and devastating torrent. The wave, as high as a two-story building and as viscous as lava, roared through the city streets. It demolished buildings, crumbled the elevated railway, and even lifted a truck before depositing it in Boston Harbor. The speed and force of this wave were so immense that it created a shockwave in the surrounding air, adding to the destruction. In its wake, the molasses flood left a landscape of devastation. The buildings along Commercial Street were either flattened or severely damaged. The Boston Fire Department's Engine 31 was swept off its foundation. People and horses caught in the path of the wave were swept along, unable to escape the sticky tide. The disaster was not only shocking but also deadly. 21 lives were lost, drowned or crushed in the molasses flood. Another 150 were injured, some severely, trapped in the sticky mass, struggling to breathe. Firefighters and volunteers worked tirelessly into the night, pulling victims from the wreckage and the sticky residue. The molasses flood was a disaster of unimaginable proportions. Never before had the city witnessed such a bizarre and deadly event. The city was ill-prepared for such a catastrophe, and the disaster exposed the lack of safety standards in industrial practices. Little did Bostonians know this was just the beginning of a catastrophe that would forever change their city. The Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1919, a disaster so strange and deadly, it would etch itself into the annals of American history. An event so shocking, it would force a nation to rethink its approach to industrial safety. A tragedy so profound, it still resonates a century later. What could possibly cause a deadly wave of molasses to sweep through a city? Let's take a moment to rewind the clock to the early 20th century, back to a time when the North End of Boston was not just a bustling neighborhood, but the site of an industrial behemoth. The Purity Distilling Company decided to construct a massive molasses storage tank right in the heart of the city. This wasn't your average tank. It stood 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter, capable of holding up to 2.5 million gallons of molasses. The tank was filled to near capacity in anticipation of a large incoming shipment. However, this was a decision driven more by economic considerations than safety. The company wanted to avoid the upcoming increase in molasses tax and decided to stock up. This decision, unfortunately, would prove to be fatal. Now let's turn our attention to the day of the incident, January 15, 1919. The weather was unusually warm after a week of frigid temperatures. This sudden change in temperature caused the molasses in the tank to expand. The tank, already filled to the brim, started groaning under the pressure, a warning sign that was largely ignored. The pressure kept building until it reached a point of no return. The tank failed catastrophically, and a 15-foot wave of molasses erupted from it, sweeping through the city at an astonishing speed of 35 miles per hour. Imagine the scene, a tsunami of sticky, sweet, and deadly molasses rushing through the streets, engulfing everything and everyone in its path. Buildings were ripped from their foundations. People and animals were trapped, unable to escape the sticky onslaught. In a matter of moments, a sweet staple had become a deadly force. As the molasses receded, the true scale of the devastation became horrifyingly clear. The cityscape of Boston was forever altered. The North End neighborhood, once a bustling hub, was now a sticky, sweet-smelling wasteland. The aftermath was nothing short of apocalyptic. Cleanup efforts were monumental, requiring the combined strength of the city's workforce. Firefighters, police, and even the Navy were called in to help. You can imagine the scene. Hardened men scrubbing the city clean, using salt water and sand to break down the stubborn molasses. The damage was extensive. Buildings were leveled, homes were swept off their foundations, and streets were unrecognizable. More than 100 structures were destroyed, leaving families homeless and businesses in ruins. The molasses had even seeped into the subway, bringing Boston's transportation to a grinding halt. The community was devastated. The North End, once a lively neighborhood filled with immigrants and working-class families, was now a ghost town. The flood took 21 lives and injured over 150 people. The injured were not just physically hurt, they were also emotionally scarred. Imagine surviving a disaster only to find your home and livelihood destroyed. The authorities responded swiftly, but the public reaction was a mix of disbelief and outrage. How could such a disaster occur? Who was to blame? The United States Industrial Alcohol Company, owner of the faulty tank, was quickly pointed out. But the public wanted more than just a scapegoat. They wanted assurance that this would never happen again. And yet, amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. Stories of heroism and community spirit began to emerge. Neighbors helping neighbors, strangers becoming friends, and a city coming together in the face of adversity. These stories, while not enough to erase the tragedy, provided a much-needed sense of hope and resilience. The Great Boston Molasses Flood was not just a disaster, it was a wake-up call. It forced a reckoning with industrial safety standards and made us question how we value human life over profit. It was a bizarre, tragic chapter in American history, but one that we must never forget. But what caused this seemingly impossible event to occur? In the wake of the disaster, investigators were left baffled. A massive tank filled with molasses just doesn't burst open on an average day. As the sticky mess was cleared, the quest to find answers began. The team of investigators, led by seasoned engineers and architects, quickly zeroed in on the tank's construction. The tank, a towering structure of steel, was built to hold an immense amount of molasses, but the investigation revealed dangerous flaws in its design and construction. The steel used was half as thick as it should have been for a tank of that size. Moreover, it lacked the necessary number of rivets to hold the heavy structure together. The tank was essentially a ticking time bomb, filled to the brim with a dense, deadly substance. As the team delved deeper, it became increasingly clear that the company responsible for the tank, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, had been grossly negligent. The tank was hastily built to meet the increasing demand for industrial alcohol during World War I. Corners were cut, safety measures were overlooked, and inspections were minimal. The company had ignored numerous warning signs. Workers had reported leaks, and locals had noticed that the tank would groan and shudder under the weight of the molasses. But the company dismissed these concerns, even going so far as to paint the tank brown to hide the leaking molasses. The investigators concluded that the combination of poor construction, blatant disregard for safety, and colder temperatures on that fateful day led to the catastrophic failure of the tank. The molasses inside had fermented, producing gas that increased the pressure on the already weak structure. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and it did. The investigation was a wake-up call for industries across the country. It exposed the dire need for stricter safety regulations and oversight in the industrial sector. The sweet substance had revealed a bitter truth about industrial safety. The flood of molasses left a sticky mark on Boston, but its impact went far beyond the city's borders. This disaster, as bizarre and tragic as it was, became a catalyst for change in industrial safety regulations across the United States. In the wake of the molasses flood, the public outcry was deafening. There was a demand for greater accountability from companies, a call to ensure that such a tragedy would never repeat itself. And this outcry didn't fall on deaf ears. The Massachusetts state legislature acted swiftly, passing laws that required safety standards for similar storage tanks. But the impact didn't stop there. The flood's aftermath highlighted the dire need for national safety standards in industrial construction and operation. This led to the foundation of several federal bodies responsible for safety regulations, including the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. These changes in policy were more than just political maneuvering. They represented a shift in societal attitudes towards industrial safety. No longer would companies be allowed to prioritize profit over people's lives. The Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1919 served as a grim reminder that negligence comes at a cost paid in human lives. The flood also emphasized the importance of engineering integrity. The storage tank that burst had been poorly constructed and inadequately maintained. This disaster underscored the need for rigorous engineering standards and inspections, leading to the development of professional engineering licensure requirements. In essence, the legacy of the molasses flood is one of transformation. It transformed the way industries operate, the way governments regulate, and the way societies perceive safety. Its lessons continue to resonate today, a century later, reminding us of the importance of vigilance, accountability, and above all, the value of human life. The molasses flood had left a lasting legacy, a reminder of the cost of negligence. It's a story of a disaster that shook a city, changed a nation, and forever altered the course of industrial safety. Today, The Great Boston Molasses Flood is remembered as one of the most bizarre and deadly disasters in American history. A sticky, suffocating wave that brought about an end that no one could have ever predicted. A flood not of water, but of molasses. A chilling reminder of the unpredictable nature of disasters and the profound impact they can have on our lives and our history. This event, as strange as it may seem, holds a significant place in American history. It represents a turning point, a moment that forced us to take a hard look at our industrial practices, our safety standards, and the value we place on human life. It sparked a wave of change in the way industries operate, prioritizing safety over profits. It's been over a century since this dreadful incident, yet its memory lingers on. The site of the disaster, now a recreational park in Boston's North End, carries a plaque bearing the names of those who lost their lives in the flood, a silent testament to the tragedy. Every January, the city of Boston pauses to remember the lives lost and the lessons learned from this bizarre disaster. The commemoration serves as a reminder of the importance of safety regulations in preventing such incidents from happening again. The Great Boston Molasses Flood is not just a story of a disaster, it's a story of resilience, of a community coming together in the face of adversity, of a city rebuilding itself and learning from its past. It's a story that's etched into the fabric of Boston's identity. While the flood may have left a scar on the city's history, it also left an indelible mark on our collective consciousness, serving as a poignant reminder of the human cost of negligence and the importance of safety measures. The Great Boston Molasses Flood was a tragedy that changed a city, an industry, and a nation. But there is one question that has been left unanswered. As we delve deeper into the Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1919, there's a lingering mystery that continues to baffle us. The molasses tank was a towering structure, 50 feet tall, 90 feet in diameter, and capable of holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses. It was a marvel of its time. But how did such a structure built to such monumental scale fail so catastrophically? Theories abound, but the truth remains elusive. Some say the tank was improperly constructed, its steel walls too thin to withstand the pressure of the molasses. Others speculate that the tank was overfilled, causing a surge in pressure that the structure simply couldn't handle. Yet another theory points to the drastic change in temperature that Boston experienced in the days leading up to the disaster. The city had been in the grip of a cold snap, but then suddenly, temperatures rose dramatically. Could that swift shift have caused the molasses to ferment and produce gas, increasing the pressure inside the tank beyond its breaking point? We may never know the true answer. The records from that time are incomplete, and the tank itself was quickly dismantled in the aftermath of the disaster. All we have are theories, educated guesses based on the evidence that remains. But the most important question, perhaps, is not how the disaster happened, but whether it could happen again. Today, we have far more stringent safety regulations in place. The catastrophe led to a revolution in industrial safety standards, making such a disaster highly unlikely. Yet we live in a world of ever-increasing complexity, where our creations grow larger and more intricate by the day. In such a world, the possibility of unforeseen disasters always lurks in the shadows. Could such a bizarre and deadly disaster happen again in today's world? We can only hope that our vigilance and the lessons we've learned from history will be enough to prevent it.